Make sure it is recording. Yep, it is recording. Okay, that's great. So, good morning and or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Richardson. I'm a final year PhD student here at Teesside Uni. And today, my PhD research is going to be looking into sedentary behaviors, health inequalities, and the social determinants of health, focusing on the Tees Valley region. So this here short lecture will develop for your special populations class, and I'm just going to walk you through some of the data that I have collected all through COVID, and how this will impact your own work when you're dealing with potential clients or groups of people you may be seeing either on placements or part of sports teams and whatnot within the local area. So, uh, my main aim of my PhD research was to expand on the current overall understanding of sedentary behaviour within our local area. And by the Tees Valley, that is across Hartlepool, Darlington, Redcar and Cleveland, Middlesbrough, and Stockton-on-Tees. So all those local authorities, all their wards, and the people that live within them. In essence, my actual project considers the contribution of the sociological themes which underlay and underpin physical activity or inactivity, including local health inequalities, as well as barriers to a healthy and active lifestyle for those living in the Tees Valley. This involves the exploration and identification of the underlying mechanisms, processes, considering the behavioral correlates which residents may face, but also from a stakeholder perspective as well. And by stakeholder, what I mean by that is those individuals employed in the area, tasked with looking after our health. So that could be someone in the public health sphere, someone delivering sport programs, someone in an educational body, group, college, school, uni, whatnot, people in charities, and a range of other groups such as housing. So I began my data collection on October 1st, 2020, and ended it on the 20th of February 2021. So it's just over a year now since then. My initial aim was to collect 500 participants across the area with an aim of collecting one person from every ward. So that'll be 99 wards, and the other additional 100 responses were going to be from people who work in the area as stakeholders. I ended the data collection in February because my sample size, I got more than the aim, so I end up finishing with 1,247 participants, and with the stakeholders, I collected 119 of them. This meant that I had achieved data saturation, and my sample size was supported by the central limit theory, which means that any new participant I was seeing towards the end, so like by the time I sort of got around the 1,000 mark, there wasn't any new themes coming in or any new answers or anything that was drastically different from anyone else was saying. So it felt appropriate to end it there. And my obviously sub aim was to recruit a participant from every ward in the Tees Valley, which was also achieved. All my participants were recruited online through various online social media sites, social networking sites, mainly through Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And again, this was using lots of forums or group chats to generate responses via an online questionnaire. So here's the breakdown of the participant characteristics by means and standard deviations. So by all 5 councils and the combined score representing the Tees Valley. Again, sample size 103 Hartlepool, 125 Darlington, 261 Redcar and Cleveland, 323 Stockton-on-Tees, and 377 in Middlesbrough. Now, obviously, the combined authority for the Tees Valley, it comes up as 1,189, which is just under 100 less than what my total sample was at 1,247. The reason being that number is lower is because once I data cleaned and screened everything, I had to ensure that participants met the criteria, that they were A, over 18, B, that they lived within the boundaries of these councils, and C, that they filled out the questionnaire correctly. There's a number of participants who are like 17 who filled in, number of participants that lived on the border between, you could say, Hartlepool and Durham, or Darlington and Durham, and they're bordering into those there sort of wards and councils, so we had to remove them. But overall, of 1,189 participants is a really strong sample size. Excuse me. Break it down by age. The sample size was kind of more towards the middle age group, are from Middlesbrough, and the main reason behind that is I'm based in Middlesbrough. I had a significant proportion of my sample were of the student age group, or were within education. So I think I had about 142 students. So that would have skewed the age range down. And obviously in Middlesbrough, you've got the university, obviously, but also you've got the Middlesbrough College too as well. So the lowest age range by mean was Middlesbrough, and the highest was Hartlepool. In terms of the breakdown by the population we had considerably more females than males. It actually worked at about 60% females and 40% males, or more accurately, it was probably 58, 59% females anyway. And again, age ranges are very reflective of the overall mean as well when you split it down by sex itself. So let's go on to the next slide. And again, I sort of delve into this a little bit about the age ranges. So once you break it down by population by sex, once you break it down by participant responses by whatever council they're in, you're looking at just under a third of responses were from Middlesbrough, nearly 30% were all from Stockton, 22% from Redcar and Cleveland, 10.5% from Darlington, and 8.7% from Hartlepool. By employment, so we had 44.4% were employed on a full-time basis, part-time 15.8%, self-employed 3.4%, unemployed 6.4%, retired 17.1%, and student 11.9%, and the disabled group 1%. We actually had quite a number of participants under the retired category, and I think we had just under 200 participants who were 66 plus, and in fact, I think of one person who was 100 years old. So we had everyone from 18 to 100, which was pretty cool, and just shows you the range and scale of experiences and comments. So obviously we've get the main screen. We've looked at obviously sex. We've looked at their employability status, and we've looked at their council. Now this is where we're going to go into low, moderate, and high, and this relates to how physically active people are. So, and this obviously pertains to your own work as well. So to just give you some context to understand what I mean by low, moderate, and high, I'm using the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, or IPAQ, and their guidelines look at how often you would sit, that being throughout the day, not including you at rest, sleeping, whatnot. And also they've got a separate one for how often you spend sitting in a motorized vehicle or transport. So that could be a car, bus, train, whatnot. Then we obviously that sets aside your sitting times, which we'll be going into later on. But they don't interact with how physically active or inactive you are, and this is what we'll be explaining here on this slide. So, total physical activity, or TPA, looks at your vigorous, moderate walking. So vigorous would be like your high intensity stuff. Moderate would be more for, um, you're doing some form of exercise, or you're doing long periods of, let's say, chores, errands, whatnot. But you are physically moving, but isn't like strenuous, whatnot. And walking is just walking in general. And then obviously your total score will then place you in terms of your low, moderate, and high. I also ask questions around frequency, is how many times someone would walk. Frequency, you would cycle as well. And we also looked at how would you do it at work, at home, in your spare time or leisure time, as it's defined in the IPAQ, and also what you do in your garden as well, if you have access to it, because it tries to take into account all forms of individuals being physically active or inactive if they aren't doing anything. So the three categories are low, moderate, and high. And as you probably worked already, low is whenever someone isn't doing really anything, or there is no physical activity scored, and their score doesn't meet the next two categories of moderate and high. So low activity, just for ease, is anything under 600 METs, or metabolic equivalent of energy expended. So just remember 600 or below. Sorry, it's anything under 600, so 0 to 599. For moderate, it can be classed as anything from 600 to 2999. So it's quite a big range. But again, for someone to be moderately active, they just have to be doing like a little bit of physical activity every day, which is good. That's what we want to try and get people to be, but towards the higher end of the moderate scale. And then finally is high, and they're hitting 3,000 plus METs per week. So all of this activity, this isn't just taken for a day. This is taken over a week period. So whenever individuals filled out this questionnaire, they are recalling their previous week of how physically active they are. So this was also done through an online questionnaire or survey. After there was 26 questions for the residents, on top of 30 questions from this physical activity questionnaire. So it's quite a long questionnaire I asked them to do. So it was converted from what's the software? Converted from JSIC online surveys into Microsoft Excel. Then from Excel, I then transferred that, coded it, cleaned it into R-based statistical software called Jamovi. Jamovi, I find, was quite useful, made things very easy to understand, but also to present the actual scores. So what I then did was worked out the descriptive stats and characteristics of the groups. So this was like the means, standard deviations, standard errors, and obviously you would have seen that earlier table earlier on, just breaking down some of the ages by sex and by council. After this, I then worked out the categorical scores, which was simply as what we've just, which was simply explained as what I've just said, which is the low, moderate, and high levels of being physically active, or as you'll find, being physically inactive. So the low physical activity category was used as a reference point for all of the groups to compare to, because as we all know, it's easy to keep someone being physically active if they're already active. It's more difficult but more important to get someone who isn't physically active to be active. So hence why everything was compared against to the group who were in the low level of being physically active, or the low category, as scored by the IPAQ. And then I plotted this with confidence intervals and odds ratios, because my aim, which what I've done is I've created probability values to predict how inactive people are within the Tees Valley region. So the data analysis set. Ignore the image first. I'll explain the text, then I'll then go into this. So I used a multinomial logistic regression, was used to predict the categorical placement in, or the probability of categorical score based on multiple independent variables. So there's to account, obviously, sex, age, employment, all the different domains of being physically active. So I would do what you do at home, that being inside or outside the home, in terms of what you do in your free time, what you do at work, whatnot, and to actually combine the total physical activity score. And what I then did was create a second set of data looking at how often or how frequent someone would sit per day and over a week as well, which looks at time spent in a motor vehicle or transport, car, bus, train, and general sitting times as well. Excuse me. So this primary investigation aimed to provide a quantitative overview of how inactive the Tees Valley is, and which my current thesis can build upon and understand. And this is where it then sets up like the actual qualitative portion, which I'll talk more towards the actual end of this. So from the image here, let's get a mouse. Got all the councils on the left, and we got the frequency plots by low, moderate, and high. Now, obviously, some may be thinking, well, why doesn't this here go like low, moderate, then high? The reason being, because remember I said I put as the reference point low, and with low being the most frequently occurring group, irrespective of sex, employment, age, ward, whatnot. Those who are scoring a low level of physical activity comes out the highest across all councils. And obviously, it's the most important one, hence why it is in the middle here. So I've got two screens here, so you may think of why I'm looking over the camera and whatnot. So, from Darrington, we've got 50% being in the low level, Hartlepool 53%, Middlesbrough 43, Redcar Cleveland 45, and Stockton-on-Tees 45%. For the moderates, anything ranging from 23% all the way to 38%, and then high, anything from 18 to 29%. So with this set of data I've then collected and analyzed, I then thought, okay, it is good that I can sort of see by each council how inactive people are, but we can go deeper. We can actually understand why and how people are inactive, and use as obviously students now, some of maybe already working in the field. You have to understand the barriers and kind of the inhibitors that are preventing people to be more physically active. So what I then did was I ran the multinomial logistic regression, and it came out with these here scores. So I'll read them all out to you. So, and I will walk you through them so you understand what I mean. So I bundled all my data into one test, because that way it can test itself against each other participant and against each other independent variable to see, does something have an impact on someone else's level of physical activity. And a number of things came out highly significant, which it did. So the chi-squared score for the whole model came out as a p-value less than 0.001, which means it's a highly significant interaction between the dependent variable, which is the categorical score of low, moderate, and high, and the independent variables, which is such as, get the mouse, sitting times per day, motor vehicle sitting times per day. That should be sex, not gender, council, and ward. So this then tells me that based on someone's level of physical activity or inactivity, their factors by their demographics is having some level of impact on how them being more physically active or less physically active, which is really cool. I think it's really cool anyway. So for the pseudo R-squared scores using the tests of McFadden and Nagelkirky, if I butchered that pronunciation, apologies. They both came out at 0.157 and 0.198, which means the model accounts for a 15.7% to 19.8% variance, which means there's a moderate to large size effect taking place per participant. So it's huge. So for the likelihood ratio tests, these were the 5 significant results, all below a p-value of 0.05, which usually would have been taught in various classes that to achieve a significant interaction with your confidence interval set at 95%, your p-value has to be below a 0.05 score. So these were the following results. Get the mouse. Sitting times per day came out at less than 0.001, so really high. Motor vehicle sitting times came out exactly at 0.012, so again, not quite as high, but still very significant score. Sex, again, highly significant, came out at 0.001. Council, bear in mind there are 5 councils in the Tees Valley region. It came out exactly at 0.042, so it's on the low end, but still is significant. And then finally, Ward came out at 0.049, so it just crept under. However, with this Ward score, I still think this is really, really good because you have to remember, if I look at all the other ones, sitting times per day is just one so within that independent variable, there's only one measurement within that. Within the motor vehicle one, again, there's only one. Within sex, there's 2, male, female. Within council, there's 5, Middlesbrough, Stockton, Hartlepool, Wrecker, Cleveland, and Darlington. Within ward, there's 99 different wards. So what that's telling me is that, there's a significant portion of these wards, if not most of them, are having some level of impact in people's level of some people's have an impact on people's total physical activity scores, which is crazy. So what that tells me is that there's something going on in these wards, and obviously this will then be magnified by their sex and how much time they spend sitting in a car, bus, train, or how much time they just spend sitting generally throughout a day as well. Now, obviously, a number of the wards make up each of the council. In fact, all the wards make up all of the councils, but not every ward represents every single council. Some councils have more wards than others based on their geographical boundaries within the area. So bearing that in mind, some places will have a greater impact on others' health. And this is where we brought on the terms I said at the very start about health inequalities and social determinants of health. So with a health inequality, if you haven't come across that, to put it simply, that would mean where you live has a direct impact on your life through life expectancy, general health and well-being, and your ability to do normal things. For example, if you were to go to North Ormsby, there's a street where if you walk down it, on paper, based on life expectancy, your life expectancy would drop. Again, the Yarm and Stockton Town Centre corridor, as you leave Yarm to go to Stockton Town Centre, your life expectancy would drop as well. Now, it isn't just because there's something in the air that's making life expectancy drop. There's other things at play here, such as, and again, this is not in any particular order. This could be Okay, so could be the number of fast food outlets, number of takeaways, creates a very obesogenic environment. You've obviously got the rate of crime, and obviously different crime has different effects on people within the area. You've got how well lit an area is. Do people feel safe generally? Is there access to green spaces? Is there plenty of trees, parks, places to do sport, fields, whatnot? How many gyms or places to be physically active? Is there places where it's well employed, or is there really good businesses? Is there high levels of poverty in the area as well? And then you go look at other things of other like well-being factors. Is the rate of obesity high? Is the smoking rates high? Do people eat healthy in the area? What's kind of the average take-home pay for the area? So there's a whole range of things. There's a multitude of factors that can affect any one person to being more or less physically active. And that's why the point I want to make you understand is that you may have all the best intentions in the world to get someone to be physically active. However, if there's a lot of things going against them, you will find it'll be quite a struggle. So maybe involve you going to their own area to actually provide a service there instead of expecting them to come to you. They may have the actual financial means to head to you, so you may have to go to a local community center or church. You could set up a massage bed there and perform your treatment there, or go to a local sports club, community center, whatnot, or let's say a local GP practice, perhaps. You have to try and make it easier for your clients so they can lead and live a healthier, active lifestyle. So, talking about the probability of how physically active or inactive people are in the Tees Valley area by low, moderate, and high scores. I broke this all down. So for Middlesbrough, for their low category, we class a resident and the resident that's male and females, it was taking account age, employment status, and ward and everything. The rate of someone to be physically inactive or in the low category was 39.5, so round up 40%. Moderate 52.15, high 8.4%. Darlington low 43, moderate 52% rounded up, and high 5.2. Hartlepool low 47% rounded up, moderate 41%, and high 12%. Redcar in Cleveland, we're looking at the residents being for low category 45% rounded up, 50% rounded up for moderate, and for high 6% rounded up. And finally, for the council, Stockton-on-Tees, for the low category residents was at 36.33%, moderate 59% rounded up, and finally high at 5%. As a image, that's represented this. So what you can sort of see is that the highs are all really low. Sorry, that's going to confuse some people. The highs are at the bottom end of the graph with a low level of probability score, and the moderates and lows are in the middle, and they would tend to overlap. Now, bearing in mind that the low, as I said earlier, is anything from 0 to 599 METs, and the moderate score is anything from 600 METs to 2,999 METs. If I was to tell you that the average physical activity score by council, irrespective of their sex, their council one, not just their average score, the average score in the Tees Valley by just by how physically active was, I think believe it was like 1,000, like it's around the 1,100 mark of the Mets. So they're on the low end of the moderate, and breakdown by council, I think it's anywhere from 900 to 1,300 Mets. So overall, again, it's it's on the low end of the moderate scale. So these are individuals who are only just creeping in to being classed as moderately active, whereas the vast majority of them could probably do with doing more levels of being physically active. So this is probably one of the strongest telling stats for my actual work. So I worked out the probability scores by sex, and with females to be in the low category, irrespective of council, with age taken account, ward, employment status. 65% of all females in the Tees Valley have there's a probability that if you're a female in the Tees Valley, there's a 65% chance probability that you're going to be in the low category of being physically inactive, which is huge. It really is telling. And again, when you actually look at the sample of females I got, even though there was more females than males than the one I collected, majority of them do very little forms of physical activity. In terms of at work, one of the most telling stats that sort of created this overall probability score was any of the females I collected when I asked them, are you physically active at work? I don't think any of them put down any forms of vigorous physical activity. There was maybe a handful, probably less than 10 that were moderately active at work, but the rest were all low level, which indicates obviously a job role that is obviously requires a desk or office based work. Whereas the men on the other side, there's a significant portion of them that were very active at work, either in the vigorous sense, so hard manual labor jobs, and or doing some moderate work, i.e. they were carrying stuff to and from buildings, offices. They were transporting equipment, maybe working on sites and everything. So returning back to the females, to be in the moderate category in the Tees Valley was 33.9, so 34%, and highly active was 1.24%. For the males, complete opposite picture. For them to be classed in the low category was 19.32%. Males score in the moderate category was 68%, rounded up, and males in the high category was 13.21%. And that looks like this here. So you can see here complete contrast. So I'm just trying to see a whole image of my screen. So females high, way down here, bear in mind is 1.24%, and males about the 13% marker. Males low and females low. So that's night and day. Same we can see for the moderate scores here as well. Now, obviously, by research anyway, irrespective of sport or just general levels of physical activity, males are and have been recorded to be more physically active than females. That's why you'll probably see more schemes, particularly by councils, schools, or public health bodies, charities, to try and get more females into sport or gyms. That's why they try also get like female only sessions in the gyms as well, too. And again, it could be down to other sort of like barriers as well. A number of so this actually ties in quite well some other questions I asked. So there's a slide further on down, but I feel it's appropriate here to sort of like speak on it. So I asked all my participants, take as many barriers that you feel is applicable that would prevent you from being physically active or stopping you from increasing your current levels. And there was 20 options, one of them being other. So there was 19 ones actually being named. And obviously you had one which was crime. It came out very high. And again, there was a number of the female participants I had that reported that they didn't feel safe in their area. They didn't want to go out. And actually two of them, I haven't coded all of them just yet, but two of them actually talked about how that they've been either harassed or mugged on runs and walks. So you can understand why that would put someone off being physically active and whatnot. Now, there's obviously other cases in terms of crime that has like a affected guys. I know there was one guy from the stakeholder, so it wasn't a resident, it's a guy who worked in the area who was trying to get people to be fitter and healthier. He said that where he previously lived, he didn't feel safe walking to the shops, just his shop, in case he was like, in case he just got harassed by a group of people or a gang of youths, I think was the phrase used. So he drove everywhere. I know there was one person, I remember, supervisor we were chatting about, and he's like, um, she lived on Parliament Road in Burr here, but she would always get the taxi to the gym because she didn't feel safe walking down the road. And again, a huge part of, for us to get people active is that even though we may offer a great service, we may be respected coaches in our fields, and we may have the very best interests for our clients. However, if there's other barriers in the way that they can't get to you, it's going to be very hard for us to deliver that service. So again, I'll talk more about that further on. But again, just bearing in mind, there's other reasons why it's underpinning why people aren't, or why certain groups of people are less active than others, and it's not simply just the case that they are just lazy. I think it's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a very poorly formatted and constructed answer if you're just simply using they are just lazy. It's not taking account anything. It's not taking account the health inequality, the social determinants of health, which is factoring in why and how someone can't be physically active. So, oh yes, so this ties in. We've cleaned this out a couple of previous slides. So, as a combined score for the Tees Valley residents, looking at their average level of physical activity, it's 1,047.55, so the low end of the moderate scale. Analyzing the scores and from the participants that I've collected, bear in mind this is just participants that I've recruited during, obviously, the end part of the end part of the first lockdown, going into the second lockdown just before Christmas, over autumn and the winter months, heading into early 2021. That my participants represent that those residents in the Tees Valley, for the most part, are not engaging enough physical activity, should be engaging in more, and this level of physical inactivity is going to lead to sedentary behaviors and chronic illnesses or lifestyle related diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and reduced mental health, just to name a few. And as I did in the last sense here, this sample will be increasing their mortality rate and lowering their life expectancy rate based on their per physical activity scores. So just comparing the actual sitting times now, because we've covered all the TPA scores. The average sitting time per day, this is obviously excluding how often you would sleep and excluding how much time you spend sitting in a car, bus, or train. And this is irrespective of sex, employment, council, war. This is just the average for overall, was 6.5 hours per day. So this was higher than both two papers, Resende, if that's pronounced right, and McLaughlin, both et al.'s 2016 and 2020, where they reported mean sitting times each at 4.7 hours per day. So their studies were done on a country level, not a council or region, as what I've done. I did find it quite difficult to find a similar paper done by a region level. A lot of the papers done either by IPAQ or other sitting time papers were done at a countrywide level anyway. There were some done at cities within Eastern Europe, which I have made reference to in my own thesis chapters. However, not every research paper is going to be totally comparable. What is comparable is the methodology they used and their population size and their age, so I can always make good comparisons based on that. So both Resende and McLaughlin used papers on country level, and they both had significantly more participants than me. The Tees Valley residents, regardless of sex, sat for longer than the Western Pacific nations, whom for the Resende paper sat the longest or the most at 6.2 hours per day, and they sat considerably longer than what the McLaughlin paper had reported, which categorized countries by their World Income Bank status. So the Tees Valley residents sat longer by those countries who were in upper middle at 3.9 hours and high income countries at 4.9 hours. So this is a direct contrast to this sample analyzed, meaning that if I was to compare this to like the World Health Organization's 2020 physical activity guidelines and recommendations on sedentary behavior, which came out in December 2020, the residents that I've collected and analyzed, they do not meet the physical activity guidelines, and they are significantly sedentary, and they have significantly increased their own risk of mortality and impacting their own life expectancy just by how inactive they are. In fact, 45.5% of all respondents were categorized being within the low category. From the councils, again, their low category scores range from 36.33 to 46.95%. So a third to almost half of all respondents reported as being inactive or very low level. And as for sex, as we said earlier, females, irrespective of where you live in the Tees Valley, there's a 65% chance that you're going to be inactive or low level compared to the males at 19.32. Using Sport England's Active Life tool, which is a great tool. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend everyone here to get on, use it. It's a good way of comparing physical activity rates and participation rates by sports through local councils and areas and what all stuff's going on. And it's free for anyone to use. It's on Sport England's site. So what I did was I looked at the Tees Valley councils pre-COVID, during, and now, just to sort of like see how active they were. So all the Tees Valley councils, except for Stockton-on-Tees, saw an increase in their population being classed as inactive, i.e. doing less than 30 minutes of activity per week from November 2018-19 to November 2019-2020. This is obviously pre-COVID. So Sport England's Active Lives Adult Survey, 18 plus, for 2020 and 2021 report. So it's a 2021 report, page 42 or slide 42, which they had a geographical map of England, and they had like a scale by colour code to sort of represent how inactive an area was. And they reckon that 54.9 to 59.9% of the Tees Valley councils are at the least active to low level ranges. What I would agree with this is that my data supports the work by Sport England. It does show there is an inactivity phenomenon happening here. However, it improves upon the Sport England work as it's more sensitive using the IPAQ, because I've broken down how inactive people are by sex, employment, age, council, and ward, and by what physical activity they are doing and how they're doing it in the different forms, being low, moderate, and high, either at home, inside or outside the home, at work, and what they do in their free time as well, and how often they would walk or not walk, how often they would cycle, and or they don't cycle as well. So the data I've gathered through IPAQ shows there is a significant inactivity phenomenon occurring within the Tees Valley, provided by the categorical levels of physical activity and probability values to assist in predicting levels of physical activity by sex, council, employment, ward, and sitting times. In short, it demonstrates these findings through further measurements such as sitting times per day, employment categories, wards, and motor vehicle sitting times for the Tees Valley population. So some further analysis what I did. This is just another way of showing you the actual scores I've then got. So the descriptive statistics and means of physical activity levels were broken down below, moderate, and high, just by council. The overall means and standard deviations of the METs were 291.22 plus or minus 159 for the low category, so very low score and a low standard deviation range, considering they make up the most participants in this area. Then we've got the moderate physical activity category, which is around 1,367.32 plus or minus 620. So you can see what I mean, how they've got the average scores on the low end of being moderately active, but their standard deviation range being 620, which means it goes 620 in either direction. So they're only just breaking the 2,000 mark, really, and they're hitting, you know, the 600 mark for low category, hence why they're on the low end of the moderate physical activity score. And finally, the high category, their average was 4,294.4 with a plus minus of 1,146. I believe there was less than 100 people in the high category, so hence why they've got quite a large standard deviation range as well. There wasn't that many in it. So breaking down the TPA scores by council using the Jamovi software, we get this nice graph. So this like splits it all up. So we've got the councils, the TPA score. So this is like the box plot. That's the mean average. This is kind of like your standard error, or sorry, no, the standard deviation around the mean. And this is like a heat map. So sort of see where's the most participants and their densities lie. Then you can sort of see where it's all at. So a lot of people on that very low end. And you can see not many getting past the 3,000 mark for highly active. You're looking at 1,000 somewhere here. So looking at kind of like here on the low end, so you can sort of see why there's so many people are low level physical or physically inactive, indicating a higher amount of respondents being categorized in the low category. And again, this is just it. This is just that, but shown as a table format. So I don't want to read off that slide. And again, I've done the same thing here, but just by sitting times. And again, it comes out just like this here. I personally think the graphs make it so much easier to explain, and it gives you a nice visual to understand what's going on in the area here. As you can sort of see, average was 6.5 hours, so over the 300-minute mark, so in and around here with different ranges, and obviously some people saying way more than others over a day and week period, obviously when they were recalling their total scores and whatnot. And again, this is just the table of that. So what I did was I split their sitting times by how they scored and being physically active or inactive. So I use low, moderate, and high instead of the council here. Again, the total sample size, how many people get it. Yes, so there was 69 high, 579 moderate, and 541 low. So very similar scores. Mean sitting times looking at, so for low was 404 minutes, plus or minus 180 minutes, moderate 365 minutes, and high 389 minutes. So it's definitely somewhat of a downward trend from a low. That's obviously grip score average total by males and females. So 458 for low for males, 401 for moderate males, and 410 for high males. Again, at this downward trend. And for females, 309 92 minutes for low, 319 minutes for moderate, and 265 minutes for high. So again, a clear downward trend. There's everything on that one. And then I did the same thing again for the motor vehicle sitting times, but just for this presentation, I've just put it in as a table. Now, obviously, differences by sex. This came out really, really cool. So if we just look at males and females, again, it's still split down by the low, moderate, and high. So we've got the same number of participants in each one, but the times are different. So for males in the low category, you're looking at 56 minutes average, moderate 67 minutes, and then high 34.69. Then for the females, for low 18.62, moderate 20.64, and high 15.17. So there's a clear gap between males and females and how much time they spend sitting, either a car, bus, or train. And this could be due to more employment reasons. There's definitely a lot more males who would drive a van or drive a lorry or truck, either for work or just as a mode of transport as well. So only a few slides left. So that's all the quantitative data I've done. My next part was what I'm doing. So I've got about half of it analyzed. I have successfully done a Braun and Clark thematic analysis for the stakeholder responses, which was 44 questions, asking them on their experiences and what they think are barriers for their clients and the residents in the area, or what they think that needs to be done for the public health service to get more people physically active, whatnot. So very much more questions around policy, politics, planning, and going forward. So I did a thematic analysis, coded it into themes and sub-themes. So there's 119 stakeholders who answered 44 questions. That produced 1,732 comments, which then created 9 themes and 44 sub-themes. And that's all done. And now I'm doing the same again for the residents. So residents, what I've done so far is there's 1,189 residents that answered 26 qualitative style questions. That has now produced 200,000 words. Oh yeah, it's big. It's really, really big. They'll be using the same 9 themes. Obviously, there may actually be less themes or slightly more, but I'm using those 9 themes from the stakeholders to guide, and that can help signpost what it is. They're going to be very, very similar responses on some things. However, I expect there to be some differences of opinions. One of them being a number of the stakeholders were like, regardless of what area they actually worked in. There was not, I think there was 8 out of those 119 stakeholders, there was 8 sectors of employment they worked in. Irrespective of those 8 sectors of employment, all of them were like, we need more active travel, we need more cycle lanes, need more places where people can walk safely, need more green spaces, whatnot. Which I'm like, great, that all makes sense to me on paper, but obviously it's like, but again, it's what the residents want. And again, if we take cycling, like cycling was mentioned loads by the stakeholders, but by my sample, when I asked them, do you do any form of cycling whatsoever, from that 1,247 participants, 93% do no form of cycling whatsoever in the Tees Valley. So if you work it out, like most councils are 90% plus who do no form of cycling whatsoever. And as some of you are aware, they're building a cycle lane down Linthorpe Road, which to me is a waste of taxpayer money. They should have used that money to improve and build up the Tees River walkway from Stockton Barrage all the way to the Teesors Park at the Middlesbrough docks. You get better lights, better pavement, so people can cycle and walk to there, and people can peel off at any time to go to work or go into the town. You're not impacting actual cars or annoying people. It's quite a safe place to go up and down there. And plus, from a personal note, judging by how many takeaways are in the Middlesbrough alone, the only people who are going to benefit from it are the Just Eat, Deliveroo, and Uber Eats drivers who use bikes. You probably get your power mode to you 5 or 10 minutes quicker. So again, these are sort of the policy plan things I'm looking at as well. So you have to take things into account. So returning to this, looking at, so take time. Perfect, that's fine. My second part, or the second phase of my research, looks at the qualitative element. So again, as I said earlier, we're talking about the comment on crime as a barrier. These were a number of the barriers I asked participants what they felt that may have affected them. So time, money, family, work, as job, disability, ill health, as in physical, mental health, distance, no incentives, crime, religion, gender, age, no interest, cultural reasons, lack of education, lack of provision for activities, lack of access to facilities and whatnot, and again in the various amounts of responses. I have worked these out and I've compared them to the stakeholders. For the most part, they're quite similar, but there's one or two that sort of jump up higher than other. Interesting enough, for the stakeholders, time was quite low, but for the residents, time was like one of the highest responses. Other ones, crime was higher for the residents than it was for the stakeholders. Mental health was slightly higher. I think it was by 1 or 2 points. By 1 or 2 points, to me, it was like mental health was higher, and compared to the other one, it was just one like slot lower. But for the most part, the rest were quite similar anyway. And again, these here are the main themes I've got all broken down to. So the 9 themes I've got is COVID, lockdowns, access, availability, transport, green space, active travel. So for number 2 there, that transport is to do with cars, buses, trains, whatnot. For lifestyle related topics, so physical, mental health, chronic illnesses, and any health inequalities. 5 was organizations, their work. 6, funding, finances, budget cuts. 7, NHS, GPs, the health services. Excuse me. 8, UK government and local councils. And 9, just any negative comments about the area of the residents, which some of the stakeholders had. So going forward, some of my work, and with obviously an extra set of data sets I'm adding into my current set with the quantitative data and the qualitative data I've got, I'm going to be using my software to create a predictive model for sitting time and physical activity for the area. And this was draw upon index of multiple deprivation scores, which is the IMD, number of fast food numbers in the area, provision of physical activity in gyms in the area, number of green spaces, crime rates, diabetes, diagnosis, obesity rates, stroke rates, mortality rates, happiness levels, and how much anxiety is in the area, all these different things, so I can create this model to predict this T side effect that's taking place in the area, and that is still taking place, as to how and why people are so unhealthy in the area, and why life expectancy is so much lower here than other parts of England and the UK. And then obviously potential papers, going forward, a post PhD, looking at validity and reliability of the IPAQ as a questionnaire. That's more of like a research method style one. And then the one here, which I think I've really started making like a fast food map, is looking at the frequency and density of Just Eat, Uber Eats, and Deliveroo takeaways in the health deprived region during COVID. But yeah, just under an hour. I hope all of you find that really interesting. Get back on the screen so I can see you. Yeah, so that's my PhD, all the quantitative data I've done. Once I get all the quants done, I'm sure Will won't mind me coming back in and showing you what I've then found, comparing what the stakeholders have said compared to what the residents have said for the area. But yeah, I hope that is of use. Hope it gives you a better idea of what's going on in the area too, particularly how it's quite a recent set of data with just COVID, with obviously not COVID just happening, but we're obviously coming out of the end of the COVID-19 pandemic as lockdown restrictions ease and whatnot. But yeah, if any of you's got any questions about it, or you want to learn some more about this, just feel free to drop me an email. So it's a.s. a.richardson at tees.ac.uk, a.s.richardson at tees.ac.uk. But thank you for listening, and look forward to seeing you in the practicals or the next session with Will. See you now. Take care. Bye bye.